So let's take up question number 4. What are endpoints, address, contracts, and binding? I'm sure that when you look at the vocabulary, and especially if you are a fresher like approximately 1 or 2 years of experience, you must be thinking that these are like difficult vocabulary words and will you really understand them? But believe me, they are just ABC, and we'll try to understand in this video that how they are just ABC. Okay. In question number 3, we had seen a small sample of WCF service. We hosted a service in IIS, then we consumed it in the ASP.NET application, and we saw that how practically WCF service can be hosted and used in projects. But whatever we did was completely practical. It was just trying to get hands-on on WCF service. But with that practical, we also need to know a bit of theory, and we need to know some vocabulary so that we can better understand WCF. And endpoints, address, contracts, and bindings are nothing but vocabularies. In order to understand the vocabularies defined in the question or asked in the question, we need to first go back and rewind back where we have talked about services, we have talked about messages. So we basically said that okay, the classes were not able to communicate heterogeneously. So therein came the concept of service, and basically we then talked about that how these components started communicating using message, right? Now, what are the good characteristic a message should have, right? The first characteristic a message should have is that it should be able to tell where is the service. For example, if suppose let's say that I host a video service on www.questpond.com, then it should tell me that okay, www.questpond.com/service/videos something. So it should be able to tell that where this service is currently. Second, it should tell that how can we communicate with the service. In other words, what is the transport protocol to communicate with the service? For example, if you're saying www.questpond.com/services/videos is the where, then probably I'll say HTTP is a protocol to communicate with it. So basically it tells that a good message should tell us that how can you communicate with this service? Is it HTTP? Is it FTP? Is it XML? Is it what kind of protocol are we talking about here? So it's the how of the service which a message should be able to convey to us. And the final is it should be able to tell that what do you need in order to communicate to the service. For example, when you go to www.questpond.com/services/videos, you will get a user ID password. So you should tell me the user ID and password. So in other words, what do you need to come to questpond.com? You need the user ID and password. So in other words, the message should also tell that what will the service need in order that you can utilize the service. So these 3 points are very essential. A message should be able to do and should be able to talk about the service. Where is the service located? How can you talk with the service? And what can you do in order to get the service? Or what are the things needed to start using the service? Now, in WCF, this is mapped in the following ways. The where is mapped with the address. So address indicates that where we can find the service. Okay, and address is a URL which points to the location of the service. The binding says that how can this end be accessed? I mean to say that is it SOAP over HTTP? Is it binary over TCP? So in other words, we can talk about it's like what is the communication methodology to talk with the service. And contract says that what is the agreement between the two parties. In other words, that what are the return values, what are the parameters you need to pass in order to use the service. So that is a what part of the service. So in other words, all these things are defined in your web.config file. If you remember in the previous practical video which we saw, we had changed something in the web.config file. So in other words, you need to define A, B, and C. So the A defines where. For example, here it is at this moment the URL address is http localhost 2465. So our service calculator, the service calculate cost will be hosted on this location. How? That is a B. So that again specifies that what kind of transport protocol are we talking about. And the final one is a contract. And at this moment the contract is basically pointing towards the interface. And if we look to our, if you go through our source code, our interface talks about that what do you need to pass what do you need to pass to the service in order to get the data. In other words, it talks about the data contract. Now, like for example, our data contract talked about the product quantity, product cost, and product name. So the interface says the what part of the WCF service, because interface and data contract define the necessary input parameters and output parameters you can expect from the service. So in other words, all these things, all these three things, A, B, and C, are defined in something called as an endpoint. Okay, so endpoint is, you can say that, combination, or it's a combination of address, binding, and contract. You can say that endpoint is like it's like an entry point to the service where you need to define these three things in order to use the service. So if you go back to a question, what is endpoint? Endpoint is nothing but, it's nothing but, it's a entry point to the service where you need to define address, binding, and contract. So what is address? Address says that, okay, where can you find the service? What is a binding? It basically tells you that what kind of communication protocol you need to define for the service. And contract says that how can you use the service. In other words, it defines the parameters and the return values for the service. And this is what exactly we had defined in our web.config file. If you look in the previous video, we have explained exactly how to use this WCF service and how to code this WCF service. So here's the endpoint, and here's all the three parameters which we discussed. So I hope that this tutorial was useful. It's very essential that, because in the further coming videos, when I say address, when I say binding, when I say contract, then the vocabulary should be very much clear. And I hope that these vocabularies will be used again and again. I hope that this vocabulary is clearer, because we are going to use in the coming videos this vocabulary again and again.